There's a phrase that comes around, and we hear it a lot in Christian circles. It says, be in the world, but not of the world. And in James chapter 4, he kind of talks about this idea. He talks about it, and he kind of gives us some strategies for how to navigate this term, how to be in the world as Christians, but not of the world. And this is a dichotomy that all Christians go through and they live through. And let's remember, when James is talking about the world, he's not talking about it in a positive light. He's talking about the world that you and I know, the world with sin and pain and storms and cancer. He's talking about a world that is broken. And he's talking about a world that is not complete and a world that is not perfect. And this is the world you and I live in. So how do we do it? How do we be in the world, but not of the world? Well, when you're looking at James chapter 4, verses 1 through 12, I want you to look at these two different ways to navigate this topic. James chapter 4, verse 6 says this, God opposes the proud, but he shows favor to the humble. Now, you and I, we have spiritual parents, spiritual ancestors from way before, and we find them all the way back in Genesis 1 and 2 and 3. This is, you know who it is. It's Adam and Eve. And Adam and Eve knew something about being proud. They had a perfect world, a complete world, a world that God intended for them to live in. And what happened? They were proud. God said, don't eat from this tree. You can eat from any other tree in the garden, but don't eat from this tree. And you know what they said? Yeah, I think I'm going to eat from that tree. That fruit looks pretty good. And so they ate the fruit. And one of our original sins is being proud. Everything in our culture makes it hard for us to be humble. To be humble means to make ourselves smaller. And Scripture says that God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Is this because God was jealous or God was overbearing? Well, he's jealous for you. He wants you to be in a relationship with him, but he's not unsettled by you being big and important and strong. I don't think so. I think what this is talking about is God knowing the proper order of things. He knows the order of things. Verse 7, chapter 4, verse 7, starts off with a very important word. It says this, submit yourselves. It says, submit yourselves then to God and resist the devil and he will flee from you. Come near to God and he will come near to you. That word that starts off verse 7 can be a difficult word for us to wrap our hands around, submit. And it can be even more difficult when we have to live out lives of submission. But what does this look like for you? What does it look like for you to submit? Well, if you find yourself under someone else's authority, you're submitting. One time I think it was a pastor, and they said that submission is finding yourself under God's plan. So if God is here, you find yourself under his plan. You're submitting to God. And as Christians, we can try a lot of ways to do this, but verse 7 might be a very freeing verse for us. What does it look like, instead of using that word to submit, what if it looked like if we said, we're in the process of finding ourselves under God's mission? To me, that feels more freeing. I'm just finding myself under God's mission in my life. Some of the biggest adventures I've had in my life have been when I've found myself in his mission. And I've kind of said to him, let's go. God, what do you have for me today? I used to make it a habit to walk. Whenever I walked through a door, I'd ask, God, what do you have for me in this place? And I've gotten into more conversations about Jesus when I found myself under his mission. I've experienced more forgiveness when I found myself under his mission. And I've given more forgiveness when I found myself under his mission. My relationships with my wife, with my family, with my neighbors, with my friends are better when I'm finding myself under his mission. And we, as a church, are under God's mission. When we find ourselves there, we're imitating God. There's another way to look at it too. I grew up in Texas. I grew up in Houston, and Houston has a very interesting geological characteristic. It's flat. And so when I went for the first time to the Rocky Mountains, it was amazing. I found myself in the back seat of a car, and my face was stuck to the window. We would go through these mountain passes, and my face was stuck to the window when I was just staring up, trying to find the top of the mountains. I don't know if you've ever had that experience if you've been driving through the Rocky Mountains, but it was almost overwhelming. These mountains are so big. Or maybe it was the first time you went near an ocean or a big body of water. It's so big. Sometimes you can also feel this when you get away from the city and somewhere really rural and dark, and you look under the stars and you say, wow, this place is so big. I think it's helpful for us Christians to remember that sometimes, to see how big creation is and how small we are. And I think there's something holy about that too, because it perfectly shows us what happens when we're humble before the Lord. James 4 verse 10 says this, humble yourselves before the Lord and he will lift you up. When we humble ourselves before the Lord, what are we doing? What we're doing is we're right-sizing ourselves. We're finding ourselves not as insignificant, because you and I have a God that says we're not insignificant. He wouldn't come to live and to die and to rise for someone that's insignificant. No, he thinks you are incredibly significant. But you and I need to find our significance in him. We're small without God. Instead of right-sizing ourselves, the temptation is to try to supersize ourselves. There was a movie, it was a documentary, it was kind of gross, and it was about this guy a while back, and all he ate for a month was McDonald's. And one of the rules he had was whenever he walked into a McDonald's, if they said, would you like to supersize this? He said, yes. Ugh, I just get sick to my stomach thinking about that. It ended up not being very good for him, but in a lot of ways, we're the same way. We have so many things in our life that are trying to supersize ourselves, whether it's social media, or your performance at work, or at school, or on the field. So much of our life is trying to make it more and more and more. But Jesus, your Jesus, my Jesus, the Jesus that loves you and calls you significant, he invites you into something different. He invites us to humble ourselves, to right-size ourselves, to find ourselves under his mission and not on our own mission. Jesus invites us into a new way of life.